Hey everybody, just before I give you the video, I'd just like to explain to you something. This video that you're going to be seeing will have a substantial amount of interference. Please take note that it's taken me a few months to put together, and if it was meant to be perfect, it would have probably never have seen daylight. So I thought when I made this video, and you can see the timestamp on there as well, that I literally had to push through whatever interference there was, which caused a lot of pixelation, caused a lot of disruptions. You'll see a lot of breaks and cuts in between. I'm just trying to relay the message and the information that it's very important for us to take note of this, hence the interference. So please take note, the pixelation is not because of anything else other than the actual interference in the video streaming itself. Thank you. Hi everybody, thank you for joining me on my channel Armed Heart, and yes, I've been away from the channel for a little while. Have been working on a very interesting, deeper body of work in terms of the deconstruction of the universe as such, and all these mythologies and stories and scripts that we've all been giving ourselves, our energies to. And I hope that this will be something to follow through, because it is rather it's a very big chapter. It's a very big stack of information. So as I went along, I was busy writing down all my thoughts and ideas and information that was being downloaded within myself, and also myself going with what I've been learning and putting it together for you to understand. Please remain objective, ask questions. Please feel free to ask on anything in here. It will be in pieces, in chapters. So hopefully this is the first part for you to look into, and I will upload the rest of the material as I go along. Thank you, and thank you for your support. And please join me with the material called The Deconstructing of the Universe and Its Influences and Control. Thank you. Okay. I start off with the quote from Carl Jung. I was driven to ask myself in all seriousness, what is the myth you are living? I found no answer to this question, and I had to admit that I was not living with the myth or even in a myth, but rather in an uncertain cloud of theoretical possibilities, which I was beginning to regain with increasing distrust. So in the most natural way, I took it upon myself to get to know my myth. Okay, so I start off, basically every human carries the signature of the celestial bodies within them. An imprint of the solar system at the time of the entry into the world or plane. And we know this when we look at our birth charts. We know that we have an inner cosmic influence, whether we sometimes are aware of it or not. And often this inner cosmic imprint or blueprint corresponds with the current time of entry within the same frequency that the celestial bodies imprint on us. We accept a constant feedback and experience it without even questioning it. Sometimes we don't question it. Sometimes we just go through the effects daily without even really giving it a thought, because we're living in such a racing time or sped up process. We address the myth or the myths of creation we create inherently as part of the scripting of the universe, or in Latin word forming element, meaning having the one only, or uni, which meaning combining form of one. So in actually, universe is really a one view on a script, and not so much a united or an un-I or anything like that. It's a united view on a script. I have a link that all the links that I have within my material, I will provide at the end of each video. And then a personal view, personal observation, which I wrote, and I'll just share this with you as well. When I become still and I allow myself to feel the first movement, the movement that allows me to feel, that I allow my perceptions to steer me, because that's the first thought that happens. When I became still and I took a deep breath and I started to relax, and I went even beyond the perceptions, even beyond the observations, and even beyond the beliefs and the ideas and the thoughts. And I allowed myself to simply flow through this particular movement as a in-breath, out-breath. I started to become aware that I was moving through the external stimulations or the prickles that is surrounding me in my environment. And I could see that the walls of my surrounding environment started to become transparent. And then I saw that the entire area that I was observing became a kind of image or a representation of something or someone that was not real. So in other words, I became aware of the simulacrum. And this is the simulacrum of the universal great mind, or the great mind that is in this solar system. Granted, at a later stage, I did explore further, but that is not at discussion right now. The word simulacrum means an image or representation of something, or an unsatisfactory imitation or substitute. And so I started to deconstruct the sacred mythos within myself. And I came up with a few things, and I basically brought some information in, and we are the mind of God learning to experience itself through the many views. But all gods and their myths were constructed for us to believe in, or be in the lie of that specific thing for us to live in. So if we can grasp this, everything else that comes here after will make sense for you. So again, we are aware that there is one creator myth that stands out quite predominantly, which it has basically influenced every single story that exists since the beginning of man. And we're not going to discuss the beginning of man or where man originated from. This is not a historical lesson. My point is just to explain to you really how humanity as a species has become aware of stories and of myths, and how humanity as a race or as a species gives any mythological story or an idea a belief, and the belief becomes a reality. And that's really where I'm going with this. It's so important to know that the natural evolution of the human soul and the mind is always in a subjective process. So this is part of the human psyche. This is part of the human psychology. We also need to know that the soul is subjective. And when I say subjective, because the soul is an interface connected through the neurological impulses of the mind and the extended awareness and the worldly impulses, and connects indirectly to the human, to the higher spirit, excuse me. thus then is the extended version of the greater supreme energy outside of this solar system, this reality, or this realm, and from the inside out and from the outside inward. Please use metaphorical observation and objectivity when you are listening to this material. And then looking at the soul more closely, we see that there is a subjective need to always seek and be satisfied. To be subjective in the sense of what is around us, I think this is more so what we are impulsively drawn to, because we all have a certain sense of impulsive drive. The soul is also universally described as an anima mundi, or Monday, or mundi. Please forgive my spelling, my pronunciation. This means world soul, or in the world experiencer. So the soul has a function, a purpose, but must not be seen as fixed, but rather as universal in its needs to seek and to focus, but individual when there is an identification with certain stories or myths. So already we can see that the human psyche, which is woven into the soul is an external, well, it's not an external, but it's a separate entity as such, part of you, that seeks to identify with the story, with any particular story or myth. I think this is why the planet has so much storytelling in various ways, like media, movies, books, telling things to people, language. It's a very big issue, big thing. So, okay, we see an example of this in social and cultural environments, and the need to always become better or to evolve, but an inherited patterned psychology. So we as humans love storytelling, and our ancestors or our old gods or our lives and civilizations have stories about beliefs in rituals, fears, tribes, and families. Philosophers such as Descartes, Spinoza, for example, have all indicated God as the nexus of every story ever told. And I think they meant that the finitude of a soul in matter were only ideal with unreal distinctions, and so these philosophers took God as another word for the incomprehensible or unattainable, and as a sole true identity of finite matter and mind. So story building or scripting, the myths personifies the unattainable, the incomprehensible shapes, and leads to social relationships. Our relationship to something that is unattainable gives us the sense that we are beyond, that which we cannot associate with, but we can admire from a distance, give it a higher presence above us. So there's a part and something to think about. Okay, so I have a quote here, which is very important. But first I would like to just explain a little bit further what I mean. Our ideologies are often promoted by these unattainable expressions or these unattainable things that we believe in, these myths, these gods, and how the world came into being by answering it with an anthropomorphic reference. So I'll explain what that means. But I would first like to give you a quote from a book written about the anthropomorphic cosmogony and the myths of it. It states here, creation myths tells us how things began. All cultures have creation myths. They are our primary myths, the first stage in what might be called the psychic life of the species. And as cultures, we identify ourselves through the collective dreams we call creation myths or cosmogonies. Creation myths explain in metaphorical terms our sense of who we are in the context of the world. And in so doing, they reveal our real priorities as well as our real prejudices, and our image of creation then gives us an understanding of it, or it's a great deal about who we are. So we form pictures with what we're being told and what we believe. Okay. The gods and their myths are anthropomorphized. So I said I was going to tell you what it means. It's important to understand the meanings of each of these terms. It means um, gods and myths are attributed with human traits, emotions, or intentions to non-human entities. It is considered to be an innate tendency of human psychology and be subjected to something higher or unattainable, but almost equal and not. This also leads to a philosophical and a theological elaboration of the myth of the primary or creation within a religious community. Religious community doesn't necessarily mean a religion. It means that the community that discusses and studies that specific myth. It then becomes something that becomes more credible. Okay, so what is a myth? The myth is, and the term myth is an imaginative expression in a narrative form or storytelling of what is experienced or apprehended as basic reality. Please take note of this. The term creation refers to the beginning of things, either by the will and act of a transcendent being, by emanating from some ultimate source, or in another way. So please keep an objective view in this material. You can see where I'm going with this. I have to take one story or one view as it's standing out above everything else, because it's what influences the world. It has been influencing the world for a very long time, and it's not per se these excuse me, these specific people, but it's what they've written down at such an early time in the awareness of myths, of creation, of the knowledge. And I'm talking about the Gnostics and their reference, their material that they've written about called the Nag Hammadi scriptures. And this is very, very predominant patriarchal background to this material. So this is why this material that I'm sharing with you is so ready for now, because we are essentially stepping through the patriarchal system towards a feminine, but it goes through another step. It becomes then balanced between the two parts, because whatever was done and made wrong in the patriarchy system does not mean that whatever can be done in the feminism energy field will cancel each other out. It's not two wrongs do not make a right. I can see that this is a very intense part now for everyone to go through. So you are being challenged on your feminine sense of energy. You are challenged on your masculine sense of energy. And if you don't remember anything about the sacred masculine, sacred feminine energy, please see the link at the bottom or pertaining to this part to have a look at what is sacred masculine, sacred feminine energy for what it is. Okay, so we know that there has literally been so many stories about creation, but there's only one, but out of one place. It's one could say it's born out of one place. It's just been spun around so much that you kind of lose the sense of where it's coming from, but it's still coming from one place, and it has the greatest influence over the planet as we speak, for many, many thousands of years. Most of the material has been recorded and recoded and somehow seem to be refined to keep going with the interest of Sophia and the rules of the Gnostic belief system or place of scholarly wisdom. So from the Gnostics, there is a first of everything. This is what I'm taking from what they're saying. There is a first of everything, and this means that it is called Barbelo, the first stage of emergence. And Barbelo is the goddess in Gnosticism. It's important to note that this is already personified. So the anthropomorphic aspect or the personification has already been put in place, that there is a goddess, and the goddess is of Gnosticism. Barbelo actually means thought, providence, forethought, or foreknowledge. So, for example, here's a group of men that sit and think about something, and they really are in the middle of spiritualizing the sense of their purpose, and one comes up with, hey, let's create this, and let's give it a personified influence, so that it may be more, so that it may have a sense of the unattainable, just a little bit mystery, and the rest is pretty much made history. So she is believed to be the first emanation of Bithos, and Bithos means depth of profundity, or before the beginning, or the ineffable parent, and or the primal father. Okay, so do you see where I'm going with the fact that it may have a very strong patriarchal sense? Okay. The supreme being is also the monad, the one, the absolute, or the aeon teleos, the perfect aeon. And as seen in the picture now, is a circle with a dot in it. And that is also called a monad. Okay, so this is, just take a note, this is part of their understanding of what they're bringing in, okay? And you will see how it influences the rest of the world. Because the circle with a dot is also the sun, according to alchemy. Okay, and monad, from the Greek monas, means unit, which also then explains or denotes universe, unit verse, an elementary individual substance that reflects the order of the world and from which material properties are derived. So the term was first used by the Pythagoreans as the name of the beginning of numbers in a series from which all following numbers are derived. So there's maths in that as well. Okay. Out of the scripture, the Nag Hammadi, I'm going to give you a quote. Sophia shares her femaleness with Barbelo. Okay. So already there's a misunderstanding that it comes when there's a reference to Barbelo as the male virgin, but later becomes the aeon of Barbelo, and aeon is masculine terms. And this is put into the actual scripture. But if we look with an internal awareness, we can actually decipher this, that it is nothing more than our thoughts, and are also referenced as masculine, and corresponds to the sacred masculine and sacred feminine principles of our consciousness. So in other words, to think is to exhibit or emit the masculine power of thoughts, and to bring to light, or bring it light, is metaphorically referenced or referred to as a feminine principle. And in this way, we project outward our creation, meaning our actions are to fulfill what we think of. So thinking is masculine, putting it in to giving it a kind of sense of thought, going through it, and then putting it into action. There's this is what I'm explaining to you. That is creation. Okay, so these aeons are also known as noumenal, intelligible, or super sensible world. They are immaterial, they are hypostatic or relating to the persons or persona of the Trinity. So please just go over this again. These things, these names for these gods and goddesses are all personified to the machinations of how you think and how you perceive information and knowledge and how you project it out and what you do with it. Okay. And it has actually nothing to do with you going forward in your spiritual journey. So the word hypostatic or hypostasis means, and there's a link here, a settling of solid particles in a fluid or something that settles to the bottom of a fluid or sediment, or in medicine, the settling of blood in the lower part of an organ in the body as a result of decreased blood flow, or a condition in which the actions of one gene is concealed or suppressed by the action of another or a different gene that affects the same part or biomechanical process in an organism. So that's the word hypostasis. I had to put it in there for you to see what I mean when I explain this. When they say these aeons are also known as noumenal, intelligible, or supersensible, they are immaterial and they are hypostatic or relating to the persons of persona of the Trinity. So thoughts are light and just a settled version of you. That is what it means. So the source of all beings is an aeon in which an inner being dwells, and it's known as Enya or Enoia, however you want to say it. And it means thought, intent, or the power of the internal eye or third eye. Also personified again for the internal machinations of the internal thought, and where one sees oneself in the as given reference to Christianity or gnosis. You don't really have a choice. You just like fall in this or that. You see what I mean when I go further. So in thought, there are also distinct references to duality or light and dark, as seen further along. The aeons from the pleroma or region of light. The second aeon is called silence or siege or siege, whatever you want to call it, or metaphorically reference to having inner silence when one goes within. The third aeon, called nous or mind, means to go within itself. So the mind, so going within your mind, really that's the simpler version of explaining to you, instead of giving it all these goddess names and God's names. Why not just give it straight for what it is? I suppose there was a kind of sense of superiority perhaps involved when this was put in place. I'm not judging, I'm just drawing an observation from what I'm seeing. Okay, it's also important to take note that the detailed descriptions that were just given with regards to the pleroma, together with the source from which they emanate, is called a region of light. So when the aeon is a bunch of aeons together, is the region of light. Region of light. Light. And the lowest region of pleroma, which is just below there, becomes darker, or the physical world. Okay. Light, dark. Okay. Then, another quote, the son of the great Archon, or our aeon creator or of the universe, according to some material, is from the female Aeon Sophia, who emanates without her partner Aeon, resulting in the demiurge, a creature that should never have been. So then, end quote. I suspect that it was suggested, perhaps suggestive to being sinful, because it's called sin. If you thought a little bit ahead, if you may have thought a little bit too far into something, maybe you gave whatever you were thinking a bit too much deep thoughts, perhaps you were outsmarting your teacher in some way, perhaps there was that. Perhaps too overtly aware, too overtly creative, perhaps too psychic, too gifted, too big for your shoes. So no, let's call it a sin. Don't think that this is exactly what I'm just giving you what I'm seeing.